Thank you very much. You can all hear me? Yes. Great. Don't worry about how long this seems. It's just that every year I increase the font size. So Jack's done all the thanking, so I'll just thank Jack for having me here. It's an honor. So I am here to launch Poetry New Zealand, and I'm really glad that Jack talked about the boat thing, because I wanted to talk about the word launch. Because it's not something we think about often, but of course the launch originally meant to put a ship into the water, right? And that use was first written down around 1400, happily in a work of literature, The Death of Arthur, by Mallory. And the idea of launching a publication didn't come around until 1870 with Mark Twain, yet another author. And it's metaphor, of course. Right? We live in metaphor, and it's easy to forget that means we live in poetry. And what better way to begin this event than with a metaphor that reminds us of how fundamental poetry is. Poetry being a particularly conscious attention to the language which we in other circumstances tend to treat as transparent. We should also give narrative its due in our lives. And there's a kind of personal narrative for me here to be here today. It's part of a personal narrative that began when I came to New Zealand almost 15 years ago from the US. My first ever submission in New Zealand shortly after I arrived was to Poetry New Zealand. I sent a few poems and an essay to the editor at that time, Alistair Paterson. That he's here today and featured in this issue. And that's now edited by my colleague, Jack Ross, with whom I teach creative writing at Massey, sort of suggests a kind of journey for me in poetry since making New Zealand my home. So it's a personal and professional pleasure and privilege to launch Poetry New Zealand. I said poetry is a particularly conscious attention to language. There are so many wonderful engagements with language in this issue, attention to image and connotation and sound and figure and form. And what strikes me the most is the variety on offer in this issue. You have tight lyric poems, you have long prose poems, poems of intimacy and distance, poems of New Zealand and abroad. And the work they do is also of striking variety. These poems partake in endlessly new ways of the traditional work of the lyric poem. There are poems of love, like Bob Orr's A Woman in Red Slacks, which I liked so much I retyped and sent it to someone. Mark Peary's 11 Memories of David, an elegy. And poems that move from the elegy, the strict elegy, to the broadly elegiac, which surely is poetry's natural state, or maybe that's just me, like Heidi North's Goodbye, Goodbye This Time. There are, of course, here the inevitable poems about poetry, a risky sort, but which at their most successful turn out to be about something else. After all, like Harold Coote's poem, there isn't a manual on when you're writing someone a love poem and they break up with you. And two, there are polemical poems, the poems about issues, poems with messages, which are the riskiest of all. So risky, I reflexively advise my students not to write them. But from time to time, these poems overcome their messages, as in Catherine Fitchett's poem, Lead, a beautiful and surprising poem that's so perfectly timely, so movingly lyric, and yet scientifically dispassionate. The author worked as a forensic scientist, and you can see that in the poem, that it makes me rethink my advice, maybe. Such variety suggests the broad taste and aesthetic pluralism of its editor, Jack Ross. And even if he works 2 doors down from me and I'm supposed to say nice things about him, it's true and I mean it. This is not, as in some anthologies, a strict record of the editor's taste or friendships, but rather a clear effort to capture the diversity of New Zealand poems and thoughts on poems at the present moment. And what comes across very well in the issue we're celebrating today is that the present moment is cut through very consciously by an awareness of the past, which is so appropriate for the theme of the issue, which is tradition. The essays cross generations. Owen Bullock on Alistair Paterson's work, a personal essay by Reed Moore piecing together the life of a poet who was her great-great-aunt in early 20th century England. And they cross continents. An essay on T.E. Home, Janita Cush Hunter's argument vigorously defending American confessionalism. And the poets here represent a range, the very young and starting out. There's one who is 19 years old, alongside established poets.
Of indeterminate age.
Yes, of indeterminate age. It seems fitting that the current editor of one generation should invite the former editor of another generation, Alistair Paterson, to present a series of poems and discuss his view of what it is to write poetry and to work toward that ever elusive and perhaps illusory goal of being a poet. In its embrace not just of volume but of variety, this yearbook, a name which seems perfectly apt, suggests that New Zealand poetry is not just a snapshot of work here, concerns there, but a flow of connected conversations. Poems responding to poems, whether it's Alistair Paterson's reading Alan Brunton or John Allison's poem on Baudelaire, the essays in many reviews responding to poems, and the essay responding to an essay in the last issue, Robert McLean's sharp response to the essay on Curnow. It is the sense that Poetry New Zealand catches such an interesting earful of this conversation and all its diversity, its aesthetic approaches, its concerns about history, that makes reading it feel as if I'm moving through an interesting, vivacious, and huge cocktail party, capturing just enough of the multiple conversations to get a sense of all that occurs in poetry over the course of a year. A yearbook of this sort is different from an anthology or a set of one author's collected work in an important way. There is a clear sense in this sort of anthology, this yearbook, of attempt, of struggle, of the work that has been sent out and might yet be returned to. These are not the poems of a single poet who has polished them to a sheen, but a representation of the life of poetry in progress. Pieces of what we might see changed and revised later. As Alistair Paterson notes in his interview in this issue, which is a very interesting interview, we're always becoming, we're never there. It is the sense of becoming, of effort, of beginnings, of struggle that reminds us, to conclude here, that alongside the poems of the 87 poets here sit the ghosts of poems by these same writers that Jack did not take, and the poems of the poets who do not appear here at all. Jack notes in his introduction to this issue that he received some 300 submissions and asks those who did not make it into the issue not to be discouraged, counseling perseverance. Alistair took my essay 14 years ago, but he declined the poems. Rightfully so, I think. Now, thank you. And that, too, is part of the conversation of poetry, a conversation that can be as difficult as it can be pleasurable and rewarding. Every poem in this issue represents the failure and perseverance and inexplicable passion that this art requires. With that, and in the anticipation of the great work that we're going to hear here, I'll break my metaphorical bottle of bubbly against the side of the ship and pronounce it officially launched into the literary waters and in New Zealand run so deep. Thank you.
It's true, we do have to be very polite to each other because we are 2 doors apart in the corridor, but you can see why we all love Brian so much and why he's such an inspiration to have as a colleague. But now I'll turn to another inspiration, Alistair Paterson. It is an evening of wonderful serendipities, I think, and I guess one thing that struck me when I was putting together this yearbook was that Alistair had a poem in the very first New Zealand Poetry Yearbook in 1951. And just thinking about that for a moment, 1951, 2018, I mean, I'm not very good at arithmetic, but isn't there 67 years? So that's 67 years, not of writing poetry, I think, but of publishing poetry, because most of us have a long run-up to actually getting to published poems. So you can see that when we think about Alistair as a writer, we think about somebody who's been thinking about it and working in that kind of crucible for a terribly long time, and who has sacrificed a great deal of his time as a writer to other people. Not just the 20 years he spent editing Poetry New Zealand, which I have to say was a pretty intensive process when Alistair was running it, because he would really work with people to rewrite their poems tirelessly. You know, issue after issue, he'd look at the poems and try and improve them and try and get them to the point where he could put them in. He was extremely serious about trying to help young poets achieve this kind of status of appearing in this magazine. But of course his own work had to, at times, I think, take a back seat to that. So it's nice now, now that he's retired from this very demanding task, to celebrate him purely as a poet and purely as a writer, and to give a little bit of scope to it. So there's a fairly lengthy interview there where Alistair explains his, or talks about his aesthetics and his ideas on poetry, also an essay on his work, and a substantial selection of poems. But of course that's just the beginning of an examination of his work, and so we've included a bibliography and some suggestions for places to go in thinking about his work as a whole. But perhaps most exciting of all, Alistair has just published a very substantial prose work, a memoir called Passant, which is an account of his childhood and young manhood, and that is another substantial contribution to New Zealand literature. So it's with a good deal of pride and also a lot of humility that I welcome Alistair Paterson to come and read to us.
Thank you very much, Jack, and thank you very much, Brian, also. I'm not here tonight for my own benefit or privileging myself. I'm here out of respect and admiration for the people who are currently running the New Zealand Poetry Yearbook. Massey University. I know when I gave up the job myself, I had a great discussion with myself and others as to what to do with it. And I thought that Massey University and Jack were two of the best places to send it, and what they're doing with it is absolutely admirable and has earned my respect and high regard for everything Massey, Jack, and those associated with him have been doing and are doing. And I hope to see, as Louis Johnson would if he was still with us, this magazine go on for another 50 or 60 or 70 years. I won't be here to see it myself, nor will any of you, but it's something that I would like, because poetry is an art form that's been with us almost as long as there has been language. And in this regard, it's an art form that will probably persist long after the television and the other mass media fade away and die. When we come to the end of time, as a poet I have been familiar with says, then that's the sort of thing that will happen. This particular issue of Poetry NZ, the yearbook, indicates the vast diversity of poetry that's being written in New Zealand now. And we shouldn't think for a moment that New Zealand poetry is any lesser than the best in America, the best in England, Canada, or Australia. New Zealand poetry is as good as anything you'll find anywhere, and it's in this book. It's in this book. The poets in the book represent a vast diversity of influences, skills and methodologies. And I'm very pleased with that, because in all the years I've edited magazines, 31 years actually in total, in all those years I've never published myself in these magazines on the grounds that I believe my work should be examined by other editors, not by me. And it's a very flattering thing to find that Jack has, after all these years I've been at the job, decided to feature my poetry in it. I'm absolutely amazed that he should get round to it. And as I said to him when he asked for some poems, I sent him 52 and told him to take his pick from them. I said to him, if you don't like any of it, Jack, just throw it away and get someone else who's more deserving. I don't know whether I'm deserving or not. I sometimes feel an absolute imposter when it comes to writing poetry. I'm still learning the craft, and I'm learning it from people in the magazines I've edited and the magazines that Jack is editing and the Massey University is producing. I think of the diversity of poets, particularly in this issue. Albert Wendt, Sue Fitchett, Lisa Samuels, Joy Blair, Bob Orr, Olivia McCasey, Gary Langford, Heidi North, Natalie Modrich, Richard Taylor, Susan Jacobs. I think of those people and of all the others who are contributing to the magazine by sending in their material, even if they're not published in this issue or don't get published, because they are promoting poetry and giving it a basis throughout the country that it deserves and must have. Now, amongst those poets are various people I've come across from time to time, and in my own case I have written some poems about poets and other people. The first poem I wrote I like to read is called The Fiddler of Dooney. Some of you may actually find that title familiar, as it actually belonged to a well-known Irish poet. And this particular poem goes as follows. The Fiddler of Dooney. Well, WB, it's a great poem, and I wouldn't want to be without it. As you put it so succinctly, so memorably, the merry love the fiddle, the merry love to dance. But sometimes there's that other thing you wrote about, that evil chance lurking in the forest, in black water, close to the mountain, where people who've never danced stare into the dark. Summer's last flicker has gone, the sedge has long left the late, and the lady, mystic, wonderful, clothed in white samite, lifts her arm from the water, reaches for the king's sword, while here in Drumcliff churchyard, not far from the ancient cross, I turn towards Ben Bolbin, hoping to hear the fiddler, hoping to hear him play, but the clouds come down, bringing with them a scatter of rain. Looking at the message carved on your headstone, the message you left for horsemen riding out to the hunt or for home, I listen to the sound of the fiddle, hear the sigh of the wind, nothing more. The poem was begun. I began writing it when I was in Ireland, where my wife had sent me on a secret mission to visit Yeats' country. That's a poet on the other side of the world who still has messages for us, like all good poetry has messages for us. There was a writer who wasn't a poet, who was a short story writer, who came to New Zealand around about 1939, 1940. She had been fighting in the Spanish Civil War, and when she was here she got to know the literary circle on the North Shore, amongst them Sargison and not Glover, but Mason and others. And one day, I think it was Sargison said to her at a party, "You were on the wrong side." She said, "Wrong side?" She said, "Yes, you lost." And she picked up a table knife and they had to restrain her from attacking. That was a woman called Greville Texador. Anybody heard of her?
Yes.
Yes, of course. Journey to Elsewhere. I wish I could have met you, Greville Texador, when you came to Auckland all those years ago. to a city still in part a frontier town, to a country ignorant of itself, a farming country, a soldier country. A deep red silence was there, a pervading unease, a foreboding on the hills and the beaches exactly the way you described them. But what difference does it make when all days become one day, all nights one night, when what's happened is still happening and yet all of it is long since over? Barcelona, Holloway, Paparoa, what you worked for, hoped for, tanks exchanging fire at El Alamein. You walked to the top of the pass from where the village could be seen, dreamed night after night you could walk down to it. But there was nowhere to go except back to where you came from, to return to where the farm boys, road workers, miners, railway clerks, anyone who could carry a gun had been sent to endure what was happening, where sand tumbles, the sky falls. You counted on getting there, that there wasn't much risk, no more than in anything else you'd done or might yet do. Yes, I wish I could have met you at the hardware store in Takapuna, on the north shore, looking out over empty farmland towards Rangitoto and the sea. Writing about it, about Spain, what you did there, wishing you could have done more in Aragon, Huesco, Almodiva. But what difference does it make when what's happened is still happening and yet all of it is long since over? I have, with my wife, gone down to Tauranga from time to time and taken the waters, as Rick said in that famous movie, Casablanca. And on one occasion there, a couple of years ago, started writing a poem called Rick's Place, Maybe. You're in Tauranga to take the waters, salty, hot, at the base of the mount, famous, of course, for what happens there, famous for being famous. But at the end of the wall, the Great Wall of China, clearly visible on a good day, you can see the heavenly mountains. And the elements of language, you put them together, bits of them, verbs listed by those who know such things, strong or weak. The ice has melted, hasn't been seen round here much since the last glacier finally slid into the sea. And now the volcanoes, except for White Island, still active, others merely resting. Sports gear can be bought around the corner at Broncos, all of it perfect for swimming, surfing, fishing. We've hats here, the girl tells us, for the out-of-towners. They make them look, she smiles, kind of perky. Yeah, good. I'm also interested in explorers around New Zealand, particularly in Dumont d'Urville, because I come from Nelson and he had a lot of trouble down there trying to get through the French Pass. Couldn't get the boat through, couldn't get the ship through. Tried everything, towing it with a rowing boat, and it took him some days to do it. And this little piece is based on actually being in those areas where he worked down there trying to get through the pass. Raison d'être, reason for being. It's raining on Condé-sur-Noireau, where you came from, the streets of Copenhagen, Lambton Quay and Wellington, on everything, everywhere, sur les oiseaux dans l'herbe, les choses petites. On the people in the paintings, in the dark and almost dark, figures, silhouettes, as William Hodges saw them in 1773 amidst the ferns, the trees, there in Dusky Bay. And the words are still there on the pages where you put them in Watering Cove, as well as with Les Oiseaux sur la Plage on D'Urville Island. The rain in the streets on hilltops that falls in time and place, on the places you've visited, Auckland's Toyo Tamaki, French Pass, Cape Stevens, seascapes with figures, Cook Strait, Blind Bay, and the birds, les oiseaux exotiques, as in the landscape, Adélie Island, Torrent Bay, Rangitoto ki te tonga, Te Aomiti, current basin, the resting place of Te Kawa e Turu, et toujours, 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 le bateau sur la mer. I'm not going to read you too many. You can read them for yourself. Please buy the book and study them both. As I say in my discussion on poetry in this particular book, as I say in there, the privilege is the poet's when a reader reads his poetry. That's true. It's not the other way round. The reader is not praising the poet. The reader is being praised by the poet for reading it, and I really like that. This last piece I'll read for you is called The Tannery. When I was in my mid-teens with a group of other boys, a gang you might say, we broke into the tannery in Nelson, at the tannery which hadn't actually been used for many, many years. And I remember it distinctly and wrote this poem about it called The Tannery. We broke into it, the one-time tanning factory, tannery, where no one had worked for perhaps 40 years, nor visited it for months or more. The dust-covered machinery, bats forgotten, unforgiving, wherefore so long they'd been silent, doing nothing. We thought we were Tom Sawyer, Hawker really, my neighbour, there with Huck Finn and another whose name I've forgotten. We shouldn't have been there, where the past lifted from the benches, floorboards, in an odour of death and decay, intractable, alien, as of the vanquished, suggesting that someone angry, violent, inconsolable had been there before us, broken the shadows, the doors, torn open the cupboards in order to tell us something, hold us there, motionless, frozen, silent and afraid. What's it?
Well, that was really quite a privilege, I think, to listen to those poems. So at this point, it's my very great pleasure to announce the winners of the Poetry New Zealand Poetry Prize. Get it right this time. We have 3 prizes, and they all involve small sums of money, which will in due course be sent to the prize winners, but which we don't have like in huge printed out cheques that we probably should do. Unfortunately, 2 of the prize winners can't be here tonight. The first prize winner is Fardausa Muhammad, who's a medical student in Dunedin, and she was hoping very much to be here, but unfortunately they scheduled an oral exam at just the wrong time, so she is going to Auckland, but next week. So thanks across the seas, but luckily Radio New Zealand has come to the party, because in the interview I did on the radio last week, they played Fardausa's recording of her own poem, and the next day on Jesse Mulligan's 1 to 4 show on Radio New Zealand, they actually had a discussion of the poem, where again it was read and discussed by what I thought was a pretty smart American poetry expert with Jesse, and they had a lot of interesting insights into the poem. So I don't feel so bad about it, because I can direct you to their website where you can listen to the little audio files, and so as well as listening to the poem you can listen to the discussion if you don't think that kind of thing ruins poems. Our third prize winner from Nelson is Henry Ludbrook, and again it's a shame he couldn't be here, because we've had that Nelson connection, but I'll be reading his poem later on in the evening. But that means we do have our second prize winner, Samira Davis, who's come up all the way from Wellington, probably via somewhere else along the way. But in any case, it's very nice of her to come along and to agree to read out her poem, which I have to say hugely entertained, amazed and terrified me all at the same time when I first read it, and has continued to do so ever since. So can I ask Samira to come up?
Thank you, and Massey and everyone who is now going to be terrified. I'll read that one last. I have two beforehand because they are short poems. This one's called Sex Poems with No Bra. You've carved a pentagram in the wood of your guitar.
Excuse me, we can't hear very well.
Oh, I'll speak louder. I'll start again. Thank you.
I'll hold the mic.
Oh.
Put the mic right out the way now.
Sex Poems with No Bra. You've carved a pentagram in the wood of your guitar. The lighter you hold against the fret is orange, sliding up and down. My legs are tucked under the neck so I can watch your fingers switch chords from behind. You make the tui silent. You make me write songs in my head that I'm too scared to sing because I know my music isn't as strong as yours, but it was me who described how we felt that night. So you play, and I breathe in the sun, and tomorrow I will be jealous of myself for having spent the day with you. Another terrifying stuff. This one's called Swell. I hope there is a baby inside me as my breasts swell double and my belly bloats convex. Each time I'm left contracting, pushing blood clots from my womb, not a child. I hope the baby stops the pain. How every other week my ovary tears away from flesh to swim in a pool of doctors don't give a shit. I'll shower, watch the clots trickle in their own red river down my thighs, off my feet, down the drain. But I wish I'd make a baby to stop the bleeding for just a while and have something warm and heavy afterwards that I could lay atop my belly when it swells and brings me pain. And this final poem, which appears in the anthology, is called Hiding. Please don't tell my mum. Mum, you said it was okay if I came home pregnant, as long as I was not a lesbian. I was 13, and it wasn't milking cows that had my fingers dripping cream. And if it were a boy who gave me that hickey, but I still have scratched it with split driftwood to make it look like a wound.
Yes, I remain unrepentant. Yep, that's terrified me a little bit too, yeah. So now we move into the alphabetical sequence of poets chosen from the issue because I know them all to be wonderful performers and excellent poets. So we're beginning with Ian Britton. So Ian, you must be... Oh, yeah. No, I should say that Ian's written 6 of poems. Wasn't there a 7th one just come out?
That's number 6.
Oh, that's number 6, okay, sorry. Mostly published in the UK. He's a very well-known local poet who publishes in most of the journals here, and who told me he was leaving for Taupo last year, but that seems to have fallen through, so we're very lucky to still have him here in Auckland.
Bravo.
Kia ora koutou, e honga. The poem that I'm going to read to you is on page 79. Those have got the books with them, if you want to look at it. This particular poem, these 2 poems anyway, come from a sequence called Luminous Particles. And I'm going to do about 9 or 10 in the sequence. It's made up of a lot of other sequences. I put this collection together and I'm in the process of we're still working on it. But this one that is in the book now is called Paradise Seekers. This street's graffiti, handstands in the rain, commuters shelter under canopies. A city's lost paradise muscles in on a neighborhood sanctuary of backyard retreats, of wish lists, girls with their body language with forked pink tongues. This ghetto of raw youth punctuates a no man's habitat, mortar-mained with dark fragments of a daytime's surrender. Here, graffiti has learned to walk on its hands. And this is another one from the same sequence called Bridging. But these eyes, fossilized in glistening rock, embedded in the bonework of a carver's imagination, transfix the visitor, the foreigner, to the jawline, to the coastline of a hill bridging hollowed out ravines, hanging by threads of luminous particles. These eyes light up, yet nothing flickers, no church or tabernacle sings. Constantly, they're turning coded valedictions inwards. Thank you.
So our next reader doesn't really need a lot of introduction since she's well known to North Shore audiences. My very good friend and colleague Joe Emini, who has written 2 books of poems so far. The latest one, Family History, came out last year and is reviewed in this volume, but she's also recently published an interesting critical book on medical poetry, which might sound an odd subject, but an amazing number of people like to write books about terrible illnesses they have. It's quite a sort of exploding genre in poetry, and if you want to know more about it, Joe has written the last word on the subject. So without further ado, Joe Emini.
Oh, thank you, Jack. Favoured exception. I taught you perhaps a few anomalous spellings. By 13 you knew most of the usual words, but favoured exceptions like supersede and rarefied. Black ballpoint dragons rattled the margins of your stories. Their fierce impressions lasted several pages. At the nape of your neck there was often a knot. Your free hand would worry it as you wrote, making a fair coir above your collar. 30 now, and in dire emergency housing, you text me the difference between smack and crack, much as a patient stranger might explain to a foreigner what a ciggy is, or that grog and booze are the same. I am far outside this story, with its dealers from the capital up for the day to flex their muscles against the walls of the poor semi-detached calamities of your town. Littles, Johnson, men like Pinter parodies, squat and joke on your mother's piss-stained sofa, then go to serve body blows to bad buyers. I know you're smart enough to say your lines and leave. But what to do, kid, when your brain cells tick like bored fingernails on a table and psychedelics are a tenner a pop, when your shoes have remnant soles and you're sleeping on bare bed slats? Still, I have only an English teacher's advice, just as back in our old days I could not make my fingers reach to untangle your hair, could not spell you out of trouble with coded homework, nor keep you in school with wish you were here postcards from my classroom. Is it too late to say the dragons are waiting in the margins until you come back with this electric connection of history and experience, your wit even quicker now in its hectic worldliness? Favoured exception. My words are warm and well shod. They have never known neglect, nor the censorship of terror. Forgive them. They are embarrassed by their comfortable home, their shy adherence to the rules. If it were possible, they would go back and tell my coward hands to touch your head, work free the knots.
So our next reader is a musician as well as a poet. I'm going to use his musician name, which I think he's now decided to use both for the writing and the music, Callum Gentleman. But what really struck me in the bio note he sent for the issue was the phrase, "He lives in Auckland but dreams of escape." And I think that probably rings a bell with quite a few people who live in Auckland and dream of escape. So, Callum, is he lurking around? Yes, there he is.
Yeah, I dream of escape, and I'm going to escape. I've got almost got a visa to go to America, so that could be worse. One of the other poets already called the poem I'm going to read from the book Morbid, so don't worry, it's not very long at all, so I thought I'd read a quick one after that, which is hopefully a bit lighter. This is called The Deep. I want to drown in that pool, where the 4-year-old boy is rummaging round, running his hand through the ebony surface. I want to drown there, where the kid watches the ripples curl to the edge of the onyx and then bounce back again to splash his wee fingers. Yes, there is where I want to bury my head, in cool water. Would the boy reach in and grab my hair, dragging my shallow shell back up to the air, or would he shove me down? Down into the granite. Nothing but a circle flowing from a small child's fingers. It's a metaphor. It's okay. This kind of is, but it's more true. It's a very new one, so I'll read it. And this one's called Red Letter. I roll from your sheets, track down my clothes, hunt for my phone. It's hiding under your bra. I tiptoe through your house. I pull open the front door and morning drowns the hallway. I stop. Stop just as I'm about to shut myself out again. I let last night pull me back inside. I find an envelope on the kitchen bench. I find the one pen in that huge jar that actually works. That jar by the fridge, it's red ink. And I write you this note. And I gently slip it under your bedroom door. And I'll go now and face the day and whatever the evening brings.
Yes, there's nothing wrong with a little bit of romance, is there? So our next reader is again well known to you all because she was in fact the featured poet in last year's issue of the Yearbook. Liz Morton, whose first book of poems has come out since then, called Wolf, from Makaro Press, Wellington. So between her feature in Poetry New Zealand and her book, quite a lot of Liz's work is now being published, so it's possible to get more of a sense of her talent and or possibly some of the places she might be going as a poet. But we're certainly all very interested to see what she comes up with next. So, Liz.
Thank you, Jack, and I feel very lucky to be here tonight because Alistair was perhaps the first person to accept one of my poems, so it had caveats. There were things to...
Pleased to do it.
Thank you, thank you. This poem's called Inside Out. Here, there is no wood stack, no lorry trucks that grind the gravel. There is no spitting into the wind, no weather-vane bird to summon storms. There are no sheep that mew about ancestral stone. There is no stone. There is no running through the asparagus stalks and gorse and clover. She cannot run. The front door is bolted shut. Skylines taunt her from their haunches. Her head is in the sand, but neither dune bugs or silt hoppers meet her there. People move like cattle, somnolent and black-eyed, along the linoleum. There is no marauding buzzard. The moon is all solipsism and nothing else. People look through the shatterproof glass and they think they see a man there. Is there a man there? Here, there is no answer but the monotony of sirens, dull to the gum ear and the gum eye. The woman with the lanyard and key is not your mother, is not a mammal, but sharpens her beak with a maternal shudder. There is no touching the black heat at the centre of things. Outside and inside, a wreckage of stars. Thank you.
Sometimes I feel that as long as I've been interested in poetry, I've been reading Richard von Sturmer, because when I was at university, one would occasionally run across some stories and poems and things by Richard von Sturmer and Crackham, of which I had a massive envy at his apparent sophistication, poise and prowess already at such a young age. And since then, his work has blossomed in all sorts of ways and gone all sorts of places, and I still find myself amazed and fascinated and terribly, terribly envious of Richard von Sturmer.
I'll read the poem in the collection, which is actually part of a 170-verse sequence called Resonating Distances. It's 2 sections. The verses are tanka, which is a 5-line verse form. So it goes like this. This is my cosmos, white daisies in the moonlight, clothes hanging from the washing line, shadows of clothes cast on the lawn. One of them could be the entrance to the underworld. More rain, pomegranate seeds falling into a china bowl. Just don't serve them to Persephone. Stars overhead blurred in the night wind. I place a flower pot against the back gate to stop it rattling. This intense love is still there across the decades, at times acknowledged by a faint smile. Apostrophia, the goddess who turns herself away, the omission of a letter, darkness. Come back again, she tells me. Among old friends, the fragments can be reconfigured.
Pretty sure I see at the back there Devon Webb. There she is. Yes, lovely to see you, Devon. So, those of you who were here last year at our launch will remember Devon's wonderful performance of her poem, which luckily got caught on film and put onto our website. So, this very enjoyable reading is caught for posterity. So it seemed inevitable that I should invite her back to read again, because we all love her work so much.
Thank you. This poem I'm going to read is called, hang on. We're all right, we're fine. Hang on.
Good one.
There we go. This is called I Want to Live. I want to live in a world where emotions are not belittled, where they are seen as the most important and holy of truths. I want to live in a world where vulnerability is celebrated and not shamed, where people don't tell you to stop being so sensitive, where the cynics don't call you naive. I want to live in a world where people are connected with their sexuality and with the sexuality of others, where decent people don't say, this was nothing, you're just a fine piece of ass after they have sex with you. I want to live in a world where friends don't treat friends like shit, where you don't have to demand the apologies you know you deserve. I want to live in a world where you don't have to continuously explain to straight white men why you don't like Donald Trump, where I think he's a cunt is enough of a reason, where you can still mention the still prevalent gender inequality within society without being called a feminazi, where you can have conversations with people without consistently being talked over. I want to live in a world where tears are fucking beautiful, where when somebody cries, everybody gathers around to hold them, because that is the duty of humanity and that is the law of empathy. I want to live in a world where you don't have to keep on saying sorry for things you are not sorry for, where people don't complain about your flaws, saying you're too this or too that. I want to live in a world where love is the greatest currency and money is just a means to an end, where life is prioritized over economic growth, where people don't crave control over others. I want to live in a world where you don't have to be afraid, where you can have faith in the law and the system, where you don't have to consistently be on your guard and armor yourself in apathy and fall out of sync with the beat of your heart. I want to live in a world where you can be an idealist without everybody thinking you're a fool. Thank you.
Right, well, let's all make a good resolution to go out and make that world. Right away. Why not? Yes. Those of you who came along hoping, as well as seeing all of our poets have just read Albert Wendt. Unfortunately, I did get an email from Albert this afternoon telling me that his partner is very ill and so he has to be by his side and so can't come along, but he sent best wishes. And so, of course, we're very sorry not to hear from one of the great New Zealand writers, I think. But it does offer us just a little bit of a whisker of time for me to read one last poem to send you off with, which is the third prize winner in our competition. Rather a wistful sort of a poem, I think, called The Bar Girl by Henry Ludbrook. No, that's just the bookmark, luckily. The bar girl has a soft mouth, like she has swallowed many butterflies. Curls over warm syllables. I am drunk just from watching her speak. She has spent too long staring into deep beer glasses where men cast their eyes to drink away their blues. She's so far away. I hope she'll leave the bar and return as some other woman. I hope the wind will blow her away. Her back arches like an alleyway. Her eyes ask a question. I can see her liking cats. I can see her in my mind's eye stroking cats that curl over her. I can see her as a blues singer, singing in a bar with a few lonely souls as the rain weeps and the wind harps on about some faraway grief. I can see her now drifting onto the stage and smiling slowly and parting her lips like the pages of a story. She leans over herself like a question mark. She smiles sleepily at the punters. The men devour her silk body and her wet eyes. She hates men. Like dogs, they form lines in her dreams and fondle themselves for her. She is so tired and so bored. She dreams of being some other way, of heading south like rain or river or bird. I see always, again and again, the distance filling in her sleepy eyes, how far she's ventured away. The bar's filling up tonight. The men are getting drunk on her. The sun heads to slide against the brooding hills. She seems to me like the moon, raging and silent all at once, filling up my spindrift pages. She opens her moist mouth and calls to me from her dream. She picks up the empty glasses, but is somewhere far away in the deep, black night. Buy the book, have another drink, and enjoy yourselves.